Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santee, and today I've got Dan Hodgins here.
Hi, Heather.
And Mike Huber.
Hello.
It's so weird when I do back-to-back recording because Dan and I just did an episode and now we have to pretend like we're just seeing each other again. So I'm glad you're both here. We're going to talk about an article that was published in Exchange Magazine, which if listeners haven't noticed, picked up on this yet, I love Exchange Magazine. They have some good stuff. Anyway, the article is called Rough and Tumble Play, A Way to Tackle Socially Constructed Norms by Nick Terrones. I'm going to guess that's how his name is pronounced.
I'm
Nick,
pretty
if I'm
sure,
wrong,
but...
correct me. Yeah. So the article itself is not necessarily like previous articles I've read about rough and tumble play, where it's here's why you should do it and here's what's good about it and here's the value of it. But it's talking about his experience with how he's noticed other people responding differently to rough and tumble play when it's with boys or when it's with girls. With the asterisk, he says in this article, I talk about gender and rough and tumble play. I refer to the binary forms of gender, boys and girls, in respect to their development as toddlers, individuals whose sense of self is just beginning to bloom. It's not my intention to exclude any other gender or to assign children's identity. So I wanted to work that in so that I don't get people already sort of shutting off because we're only using the words boys and girls. But let me start with this piece from the middle of the article. He says, my belief that all children of any gender, including and most certainly toddlers, are competent and capable. They carry a tremendous capacity for the potential to be resilient, powerful, and brave, and these qualities will only grow as far as and as much as we adults allow. Which, standing alone, I think is a powerful statement. But in this this context of, do we treat rough and tumble play differently, and are the girls not getting the same benefits that the boys are, and other people's attitudes about it? I guess that's kind of where I think we'll go. But I want to let each of you talk a little bit about why you're here to talk about this one or what your thoughts are about it.
Mike, are you?
Yeah, I'm supposed to start.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, in some ways, I'm going to make this personal. When this article came out, I just felt like a kindred spirit, because I've had the same issue, right? That people, oh yeah, I have boys in my class, so can you tell me what to do, sort of thing. And it was just like, I kept finding that, kids of any gender were really interested. If as a teacher, I made sure they knew it was okay. Because certainly I set the tone as a teacher, and friends I know, who have classrooms also, regardless of their own gender, the kids also will, be worried or do it, but, kind of like stop to look to see if the teacher's okay with it. And yet I found that not only do girls engage in this play, that some girls, like, it's their favorite thing. And I remember the first year I started allowing it, there's one girl who was new to the class. Everyone else knew each other. And we were talking about rough and tumble play and all the kids said, oh, I roughhouse with my dad. It was always dad in that. And she just turned to me and said, I roughhouse with my dad too. Maybe if I roughhouse with these guys, we could be friends.
Did she really?
And it was just like, oh, thesis is done, So, but I thought it was, like that. She articulated it better than any adult I've seen until Nick did this article.
Yeah.
And it turned out that they quickly learned that it took two others to take her down. That she was even though she was the youngest in the class, she could take anyone on. So I don't know. I just find this article like liberating in that sense of, like, I constantly feel like when I talk about rough and tumble play, I have to pause and say, I'm not talking about boys. I'm talking about when kids play rough.
Yeah.
I think
rough and tumble play.
Answer to just say I agree with them.
Yeah. But I think often it's seen as a remedy for the boy problem.
Correct.
this
Right.
rough and tumble play
Yeah.
instead of as an opportunity for
Right.
all
And
children.
maybe that's the other thing I want to get at is this idea that it's a remedy
Okay.
rather
I'm
than
making a note.
a child's right to play, right? You know, it's more
Yeah.
like, oh, they only can play this way if they need it.
Yeah.
If they show me they need it, then
Right.
I'll do it.
If we see that they can't sit in circle time, we'll allow a little rough and tumble play.
Yeah.
And where I came from with the article is the fact that it's really not about what gender enjoys or needs rough and tumble play. It's the adult's attitude about rough and tumble play.
Yeah.
And I think frequently in programs they will say things, and Mike, you might have heard this too, is we need to hire a male in the program so that we have more rough and tumble play. And I'm thinking, wait a minute here, why does it have to be more male? Not that I don't want males, because I do
Yeah.
in the program, but the idea that only adult males can create and establish a climate of rough and tumble play really does set a tone for social consciousness, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part that I find missing in the article. Not that I don't support it. I was like Mike. I was excited to read that somebody else believes in rough and tumble play. That was exciting in itself.
Yeah.
But I worry that that we again establish it only for a particular gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's talk about it as a remedy first for what people perceive and call, like conference presentations use the phrase the boy problem all the time.
Right.
So why is it more than a remedy, do you think? Or why is it not a remedy? Why should we not say
Well, I mean, I think if you just look at the needs of children for sensory input, if you want to just go abstract with it, I mean, we could go into just the spiritual idea of like that children need to play and need to have joy, right? So I'm not trying to not talk about that one too, but I feel like people who say that, I often talk about, so what's the sensory diet?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so a child who needs sensory input needs to be jumping, needs to be roughhousing, needs to be, and they'll usually find what they need, right? They're going to be climbing on something, they're going to be knocking things over, they're going to be carrying ridiculous things around. Like here, I'm just going to carry this chair over my head for no reason.
We have one of those like green teeter-totter alligator things outside, and they'll just carry that around and like try and get it up the slide and carry it with them. Yeah, it's so fun, the things they choose.
Right. So they're showing you what they need, and maybe it is like I find for teachers who aren't like don't naturally want to roughhouse with kids, if I talk about the sensory needs, then it's a little easier for them to watch that and say, oh yeah, he's showing me he needs this, or she's showing me she needs this, or they're showing me they need this input. So therefore, what can I do? Just this week, I was in a classroom right before nap time. A teacher's reading a book to kind of settle kids down, but these 3 kids were over on the side playing family, and the baby was supposed to be going to sleep, and he was like, had his hands on a shelf and was jumping up and down. And I'm thinking, what great sensory input. This kid is like, he's always a hard one for them to nap. Yeah. And sure enough, like, so I just allowed it, and the other teacher clearly was not comfortable, but it's, you know, I'm the coach, so they're kind of letting me do it.
Yeah.
Though they did call over 2 or 3 different times, like, hey, you guys, it's not time to play the way. I just, you know, kind of like, you know, gave that nod of like, don't worry, we got it.
Yeah. And
sure enough, those 2 of the 3 kids there slept then. And they're kids that usually are really loud during nap time. And I try to always explain, by the time you see that a child really needs this, it means 30 minutes ago, they needed the input. And if you just don't allow it, you're still going to get the behavior. You just have to decide, do you want it to be while you're trying to put kids to sleep? Or do you want it to be a half hour before nap time? You know, because it happens. So I guess that's the way I think of it, as just kids have sensory, if you think of it as a diet, like you don't wait until a kid is so hungry that they're going to pass out or they're going to chew on their friends. You give them food at intervals
Uh-huh.
throughout the day. And the same should be happening with things that involve the whole body. And for some kids, that's roughhousing.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And
If
there
they have
are
space for
people,
it, they'll do it.
there are people who would say, you had me at play as a right. And then there are others who need that little bit of extra rationale to make it click for them. And so
I kind of do the same thing, Mike, as Mike is, because, and I focus on how rough and tumble play can create empathy, because there's so many adults who often view it as opposite of that rough and tumble play. It's not possible to create empathy if we allow children to jump on each other, or jump on an adult, or jump up and down in a cabinet. And so looking at how we create that sense of social justice by creating a sense of empathy is it's easier for people, I think, to accept that rough and tumble play is an essential part of creating that. They're more willing to receive the idea. It's interesting to me that it's easier for them to accept going outside and running and climbing on climbers and swinging real high if they have a swing. It's so easy for them to accept that, but they view rough and tumble play still as creating a sense of violence or aggression. Matter of fact, even in the article, they're talking a little bit about it's a teachable moment for social justice. And they looked at it in terms of how to help children become less aggressive by providing rough and tumble play. And I look at it as how do we create a sense of empathy through rough and tumble play. It's kind of easier for them to accept it as an authentic, natural experience.
Yeah. And with that, I think the important part of empathy, because this is when I see people who just start doing rough and tumble, is that often the way a child shows that, oops, that was too much for me, you're getting a little too rough, is they will cry.
Yes.
Cry in the way that as soon as the one child stops, the other child stops crying.
Right.
And for a lot of new teachers new to this, or adults new to this, they think, oh, we have to stop it.
Yes.
Because someone's crying. But if you just pause and watch, they're showing that empathy, right? Like, oh, they're starting to cry. I better stop and see if they're okay. And as soon as they do that, the other child knows, oh, okay, I can trust you. You're being empathetic with me. Let's roughhouse more. And so when they first start, there'll be a lot more crying. And that type of cry where they stop when the other person stops, that's different than if someone actually gets hurt and is, needs an adult's assistance. But if you just pause and watch for 2 extra seconds, you can figure it out. But I do know, adults have that. If you've never allowed it before, you want to jump in and save the kid, and then you're kind of spoiling the whole empathy relationship. I don't know, whatever. Empathetic actions they're actually having.
So before we can even look at rough and tumble play as any sort of context for social justice and gender equity and those kinds of things, we have to be comfortable with the fact that kids deserve it and need it regardless. Like we have to be comfortable allowing it or facilitating it and supporting it for all the children. And that's, I think, a foundational step before we can get to this next. Like I've got a little girl in the class right now who, when we're inside, would play in the dramatic play kitchen all day long, just taking care of her babies and accumulating plates. Really is all she wants to do, is have all the plates. But we go outside and she is wild. She's running and she's chasing and she's trying to get, she's the only girl, so she's trying to get the other kids who are boys to chase her around. And it's interesting that she clearly has that need still, even though her personality seems to be this quiet, sedentary play kind of person. She still has that need to meet that those urges and to play in that way. But again, she's outside, so we don't think anything of it. We think this is what outside is for. And then we think, Well, we let her get her energy out. So now she'll comply when she's inside, which is the other piece of rough and tumble play that I have lots of conversations about.
Right. And I'd get the energy out.
Yeah.
We could spend an hour on that.
Yes,
one,
right.
too.
Because also it's just their right.
It's their right.
And a need. It's not a tool. It's not a remedy again for
Right.
parts of
The
childhood.
only
that are
reason
hard
you're
for us.
allowed to run or play rough is because it'll get your energy out so we can do the important things.
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly.
You know,
We'll do that
it's-
one another day.
how we set up an environment too, you know, art area, blocks, science, whatever people decide is important, also doesn't support the idea of rough and tumble plays. So
Mhm.
the fact, I don't know, but you might, but often I'll get questions of how do you set up a rough and tumble area?
I think I asked you that question about 5 years
And,
ago.
you know, I think, what the hell are you talking about in terms of an area? But I think that's the framework that especially new teachers are induced to and created by whatever training they've had, rather than looking at how do we integrate a variety of experiences, and that rough and tumble play is part of that variety
Mhm.
of experiences. And I don't think we're going to be able to get out of that until we move from, looking at only particular sections or areas of the classroom
Right.
is allowed that experience. And I think, like you pointed, Heather, when she goes outside, she's allowed to be
Mhm.
wild,
Mhm.
essentially. But inside, the area might create a different mood because there's not an integration of rough and tumble play, essentially.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. And for children under the age of 8, certainly under the age of 5, the need for movement, the need for sensory input, all of that is greater than the need to read. And I don't think there's a single teacher who would stop a child from reading away from the bookshelf or the book area or library, whatever. And yet the thing that children need the most at this age is relationships and, physicality. And that's like, well, you have to wait till you go outside. And so, yeah, wait till you go outside to read the book. Wait till you go outside. We wouldn't do it for
We'll take the
anything
book
else.
to the
You can't hug
playground
your
and
friend.
there.
Yeah. I mean, even if we just thought of it as this is one way to hug your friend,
Mm.
would we tell a child to stop hugging in other cases? I mean, maybe while one kid's on the toilet, you might like give them a little space.
Right.
There might be some time where it's not appropriate, or while the child's sleeping.
Right. Yes.
But other than that, you wouldn't stop a child from hugging someone. This isn't the hugging area, like.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
what do we call that? The quiet corner. A whole other.
Well, and that's the thing. I think kids find the place that no one's using to be rough.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quiet corner is often the place because they're not going to interrupt other kids.
And there's cushions.
No one else is over there. Let's go. There's cushions. Let's go over there. And the 2 or 3 of us will just start wrestling. They're actually using, decision-making skills, being empathetic with the rest of the group. And the first thing teachers usually do is say, that's the quiet area. You can't.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. It's like, so now they're going to try to do it in the block area and knock over someone's building and get in trouble again.
Yeah.
Or the circle rug.
Or the
becomes the wrestling ring.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Like they're really good at figuring out where to do it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I keep indicating to people who are in the interview process of hiring new staff, the idea of they're interested in what they see as important for children, but the question relating to rough and tumble play is hardly ever introduced in an interview. To me, it's important to know whether or not an adult will get down on the floor and let children jump on them.
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of things are crucial. But very seldom have I ever heard someone ask an adult who's new to a program how they view that.
Mm-hmm.
And why is it crucial? And I think that's where it almost has to start because you want someone who is not only aware of what rough and tumble play is, but would encourage, support, and allow it to happen is crucial.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the first things that I did when I took over as a center director, they'd had the same director at the center for like 20 years. And so I came in knowing there was a culture already established. So I just wanted to spend time playing in each classroom. And I was in the what they called the pre-K classroom. And I just started crawling around, and they all like were piling on my back and hanging onto my legs and trying to knock me over. And it turned into this humongous dog pile of me and all the pre-K kids. And there was shock
Right.
in the other teachers' faces. But it was just a good way to say, this is going to be okay now. We're going to play this way sometimes.
Yeah.
And also,
And
it's
think
just
of
fun.
the justice issue in that, right?
Right.
If the teachers were thinking this isn't appropriate, what they're really saying is your desire to play in this way is not okay, right? So they're
Yeah.
telling children essentially that part of their being is not okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, to me, that's like the justice issue.
Yeah.
Like what it really boils down to
Yeah.
is teachers are telling children that you're wrong for wanting to do this.
Your body is wrong. Like the messages you're getting
your
from
body
your
is wrong,
body
yeah.
are wrong. And that's big for me. Like
Yeah.
we want them to, learn when they're hungry and when they're full, and learn when they have to go to the bathroom, and all these things that we're trying to get them to read their body for. And then the biggest messages about movement and touch, we're trying to teach them that that's wrong and they should be.
And the body in general, now that you talk about it. And you two actually did an episode not long ago, the moral issue one, got into it a little bit of spending all this time with toilet training. And then as soon as you can, don't say the word poop anymore, because, so anything to do with the body, there's definitely this separation of like, we're getting you ready for school. Bodies have no place in schools.
Right. This is a neck up situation.
It's a neck up situation. Like that's what Zoom is the perfect schooling situation. I'm assuming no school is going back to in-person education because we finally got rid of their bodies.
Yeah. And I think that the idea, going back to the gender issue, is that I think that females in the classroom are discouraged more frequently. That's my observation.
Absolutely.
More frequently than, the males. We allow male children to exert themselves physically, but when it comes to females, there's that idea that they're not supposed to do that, it's not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking this is still pretty common.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking we're in 2021, we're still not encouraging.
And let's think about that message to girls then. You don't get control over your body.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Your desire for what you want your body to do right now is wrong.
Right.
And I'm going to keep you from speaking or like doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
Or, expressing yourself physically.
Right. Yes.
And that's why we get this like problem with consent and frankly, the problem with slut shaming or whatever, right? There's the two poles.
Yeah.
And like, there's like, and we started in the toddler room or preschool.
But we think we're protecting, right? We think that we're doing, and it's, as an adult, I like to say chivalry is just benevolent sexism. Like it's just holding that door for me is just saying, I acknowledge that you're something fragile that needs to be cared for. And so if we're thinking about these young children, these little girls in our early childhood programs, and we're saying, oh, be careful. Oh, you shouldn't play that way. Or we don't push girls. We shouldn't push anybody really. All those messages add up to and feed the culture that's already there, if I'm honest.
In the article also, he talked about the idea that some people believe rough and tumble play creates a feeling of dominance. They actually call it bossy. And I'm a believer that all children need an opportunity to dominate at
Right.
one time
Mhm.
or be in control.
Mhm.
And that I believe that rough and tumble plays, we talked a little bit earlier, creates an opportunity where children can make decisions about, am I being too rough or not rough enough?
Mhm.
It really builds on relationships.
Mhm.
And I think that that's an important component of this, because we really view still rough and tumble play as perhaps creating a sense of violence
Mhm.
or quote aggression that's used frequently. And I'm thinking that this really develops an opportunity for children to be what they need to be, whatever that is, whether or not being dominant is being holding onto someone's neck and dragging them across the room,
My God.
or whether or not it is just saying to someone, go get that.
Yeah.
But everybody needs that sense of domination. And I don't know where we came up with the idea that it is necessarily always wrong.
Mhm.
And I think Rough and Tumble Bay
Well,
provides for that experience
Yeah.
in negotiation.
Mhm.
and who's the most dominant person in most children's lives? Their mom.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
we're totally okay with them playing mom.
Yes.
And it's just like, wait a minute. And even the mom
Uh-huh.
who's telling him, kid, it's bedtime right
Yeah.
now. Baby, go to sleep. Do
Yeah.
this, do that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, if you want to talk domination, like,
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we can connect both what you just said, Dan, about domination, and Mike, what you were saying about essentially consent a little while ago. That in rough and tumble play, they get both experiences, right? They get that practice being the one with the power, but they also learn to read cues and when to back off with the power,
right.
in a much more effective way than if we sat down and read a story about consent or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Or even hands are not for hitting and those kinds of things. In that play with their choices and their freedom to explore, they have much richer opportunities than anything we could set up.
And in general, that's true of play for
Yeah.
every type of lesson. But yeah,
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that's what Dan and I were talking about in the last episode. We were talking about
Oh,
job
okay.
charts and how play is the best way to learn community and responsibility. So it's a theme now. We
Oh,
like
boy.
play.
Yeah.
We could just say that.
Yeah, there we go. Just each show could be 1 minute long.
Right.
Yep, we like play.
Play is the best
You
way
like
to
play?
do this.
I like play. Okay.
Okay, we're done.
But that's the wonderful thing about play is it's so complicated, complex, that saying you like play isn't enough. You have to constantly like reflect, am I actually allowing for play? Did I just shut something down?
Oh yeah.
Because I told them, no, we have to go in now. Even though the only reason we have to go in is because, it says 11:50 on the clock or whatever. But they're playing, right? So, we have to, it's not as easy as saying we like play. We have to constantly think about, and there are sometimes limitations for,
Right.
when you can play, at 5 o'clock, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Like you do have to go home with your parents
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
Like,
or you're sharing the playground space.
I know you
and
want
the
to
next
play, you
group
can play with
doesn't
them
come
somewhere
out.
else,
Yeah.
but like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Of course, there's a reason.
right. And boy, like during COVID, that's been a lot harder where
Yes. What
we
hasn't
haven't been
been a
as,
lot harder?
as flexible in the past, as
Yeah.
we have been in the past.
Yeah.
Good point.
Ah,
So,
it's got to be over soon, right? This COVID nonsense.
well,
What else?
we are now allowed to overlap 2 classrooms in our playgrounds, so that's exciting for us.
Oh, see, I haven't had to deal
Like
with
each
any
classroom
of that
has
stuff.
one partner.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I just have.
And it's
one
amazing
class.
because it's still not totally free, but it still feels much better.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, oh yeah, it doesn't matter if this group and we, like stay out on the playground together or.
Yeah.
Oh man.
We're learning so
Anyways,
much.
Yeah, no,
learning
I think
so
it's
much
gonna
during
change.
COVID. What else? What else did you like or not like or want to talk about in the article? From the article, anything?
I like the idea that he said that the notion of being powerful over someone can be relationship building, where we view it as someone taking charge, and therefore it's not appropriate, especially as it relates to toddlers. Can you imagine saying to toddlers, whether you do it verbally or unconsciously, that, you know, running and pushing someone is an act of violence, where, you know, he indicates, you know, it's an act of allowing a child to have that sense of power, and creating that kind of relationship is important. I was thrilled that he wrote that in the article, because again, there is that idea that pushing and shoving and creating those kinds of mischievous opportunities is negative, and he looked at it in a way that was appropriate for all genders, and not just boys, but also girls and any others in terms of that. And I see it more frequently among toddler programs, where we want them to comply rather than because that's how we're going to make them better preschoolers.
Right, because they're not babies anymore.
Exactly.
Got to get them ready for preschool. Yep.
Right. So it's almost eliminating. The question is always, how do I stop kids from doing this particular kind of behavior, rather than how do I create a space where this can occur more frequently, is often still the question among people who get together to talk about this subject.
It's interesting that you mentioned it, because I always think of when kids start speaking, that's when teachers really shut off. Like, okay, no, you can no longer express yourself physically. Like now you have to
I hadn't thought
use
about
your
that.
words.
Right.
But it's true. The toddler thing is true too. But I just see like kids going down the hall and friends will kind of nudge each other back and forth the whole way. And it's like, to me, I see they're showing signs of friendship. But other teachers see there's no compliance here or something.
Right. Yourself, and I'm thinking, what? How is it possible? You put me with a group of children and you want me hands to myself?
Right.
And they're both smiling and laughing as they do it too. That's the other thing. Like no one's I mean, right, that's the different, like dominator or domination was the word, you know, we've been using. And there's a difference between dominating in the way that you're like, I'm taking this role of power, but because you're okay with it or whatever, versus I'm doing this to you and you are trying to get away from me. You're like literally running down the hall away from me and I'm running after you to push you some more. Like
or saying stop.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
And so like just being able to see that, I don't know, like that's definitely one that I struggle with as a coach, of how to help teachers see that.
And with that specific example, so we're trying to get from A to B, and we think that we can do that faster if everyone just walks and there's no, playing in line. But by stopping what they are needing to do and what is not hurting anything, we create more problems, because now they're going to be trying so hard to stop, or they're going to keep going and we're going to get upset and stop and feel like we need to correct them. And it's going to eventually, essentially take longer to get there anyway. And we're all going to be more frustrated when we get there. If we had just looked at it and said, oh, they don't seem to mind and we're still moving. Right. Let's just keep moving.
And if it took longer because they're doing something they're interested in, who cares if it takes longer? Like,
right.
It's like I stop when we're walking down the sidewalk and there's ants crawling and the kids have to stop and watch. I stop because look, there's ants. Like, why wouldn't I stop?
Right.
Like, I don't see what, like, I don't think we have to teach the kids to worry about getting to a place on time. I think we have to worry about noticing the world and all the wonderful things, whether it's relationships with their friends that want to push with me, or seeing something
And
cool or
because teachers in our teacher training programs have been taught about science with young children and how to, bugs are science. So it's easy to justify that stop maybe, but we're not, hearing most, at least in mine and most people I know aren't hearing about the value of rough and tumble play in their teacher prep
right.
programs. They see that as a behavior thing, but the ants are science, and we lose
Right.
balance.
That's yeah. So the justice issue comes up to adults, basically.
Yes. Yes.
It's easier to control ants than it is
To control touching and pushing.
Subject, yeah. And Teacher Tom, in one of his messages, I don't believe he does a log every day, but anyhow, he said, "Are we making time for fighting?" That received quite a bit of response from adults saying, you mean that we're going to allow children to fight?
Mhm.
He didn't say worldwide wrestling. He said fight, which there's a real difference in terms of that. But I think that's part of this whole idea that rough and tumble play will only create chaos.
Mhm.
It will only create more hurting. Even though we don't have any evidence of that, it doesn't matter.
Again, it
and
seems
have evidence
logical.
the opposite. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And we just want to stop it. We don't want to, matter of fact, people don't even want to talk about it in some cases because they really don't know how to start it or allow it to occur. Because you're right, we don't have classes, and we have very few workshops on the subject of rough and tumble play,
Mhm.
because if we talk about it, then we have to allow it to take place. Therefore, let's not talk
Right.
about it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no not no desire, but I did not think I'd be considered one of the experts on rough and tumble. I was just like, I'm noticing this, and then people start asking me to speak because
Yes.
Unless they're going to fly Dan in, it's like, okay, Mike, you'll have to speak about this. And, it's just that thing of, wait a minute, especially I was resisting because of the gender thing. Like, I don't want to be the guy. Yes. So therefore I have to talk about rough and tumble. And yet, and it's not only guys for sure, but,
right. Right. I mean, Francis Carlson, right, is the one who kind of started this with the big body playbook.
Yep.
And
mm-hmm.
So,
no, go
ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of social justice, she wanted to write that book first and realized that most people would freak out. So she wrote the book Essential Touch first.
Oh,
Actually, I think she might have even written most of the other book first, but then realized, first I have to just say it is okay for, teachers of all genders to interact with children.
Right. I forget that some programs are scared of touch, period.
Right.
They're really nervous about whether it's being sued or, somebody taking it too far or whatever our concerns are. I forget that that's even still a baseline for some people. So of course, rough and tumble play would be really scary to think about.
Right. and if you're not even letting them hug.
Yeah.
Right. And yet it's just the opposite, because we're talking about relationship building again. And like Mike said earlier, when to stop, when not to stop, how rough you can get versus how, not rough you are. And it really provides so much opportunity for that to take place. And I think that children need and want those experiences of you're hurting me. And so to be able to say, stop, I don't want to play anymore, is an indication of relationship building. And where else what other experience can they do to create that opportunity of being able to control when I want to stop and when I don't want to stop? It really creates a great avenue for that to take place.
And I think there are people who would say, but sometimes it goes too far. And sometimes kids really do get hurt. And I haven't seen that. Like, I haven't seen a real injury or even real fear
Yeah.
in
I'd say the most dangerous thing that I've experienced in my 30 years is children putting away blocks. Like that is the most dangerous
right.
activity that kids do.
Yes.
I've had, a teacher broke a finger doing, while it was happening. Other kids get hit in the head by blocks.
Yeah.
And I still actually have kids put away blocks
Mm-hmm.
every day. And there is some research. I think Michelle Tannock, who's done some research on rough and tumble play, I don't know if she did the research or she at least told me that, yeah, there's no evidence that rough and tumble play causes more injuries than any other play.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a researcher down in Dallas who is finding that in elementary school, letting kids have more recess has actually decreased injuries because they're out there playing more and are able to understand their bodies better.
Right, and they're stronger
and have less injuries because now they're letting kids just run around and,
shocking.
So
who could have guessed?
Yeah.
Speaking of common sense,
it's I don't know. It's just weird to me sometimes how hard people who are in a field where we say, we use things like evidence-based practice and research-based programming, and then we're so resistant when anyone offers research that challenges an established habit of the culture.
But when you look at even criterias of quality,
mm-hmm.
different forms of accreditation, where is rough and tumble play on those?
Or movement at all?
Not there at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've almost viewed it as not important part of what quality is.
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that even though we know that children need lots of big body movement and lots of opportunity for physical, but we limit it by preventing rough and tumble play essentially,
mm-hmm.
and it's not in any form of criteria of quality. And again, we create this climate that forbids, in some cases, those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Which I think does contribute. I mean, I hadn't thought about it in that way in terms of whether it's on our checklists and stuff, but the invisibility of movement and rough and tumble play in programs, I think contributes to this boy problem that we're so concerned about, because part of that problem is they're getting disproportionately expelled from early childhood programs. And most often it's because of movement and things being seen as misbehavior, or their needs, bursting out from being repressed for so long. So it's a cycle we've created, and now suddenly we're really worried about it.
Or how many times somebody's called butt face, Right. That will
actually
too.
I actually was at a workshop that Sue Bredekamp was doing on developmentally appropriate practice, and someone asked her, "Is rough and tumble play appropriate?" And I was pleased by her answer, to be honest.
Good.
But it was just so interesting that she, clearly, as she was answering that question, this audience who's been kind of eating up everything she said is suddenly like, how dare she say that young children need to do things physically? And I think she even went into physical development is one of the ways, we're always looking at the whole child. That includes physical development. She didn't get into the empathy and all those other things that I would have argued. But people were so surprised that she would say, now, admittedly, she didn't really put it in her book either way. That it's developmentally appropriate. But clearly she was whatever, it's sort of like, well, of course, once it was brought up to her, and that's part of the culture thing. No one thought to put it in.
Right.
But then it was like, well, if you think about it, if you just reflect on what I'm saying here, then yes, of course it's okay.
Yeah.
But culturally, culture is so strong that even though it's not written anywhere and we have no research to back it, people will, we can't have kids pretending to use guns. We can't have kids calling each other butt face.
Right.
And of course the roughhousing thing, like there's nothing anywhere that shows that.
Yeah.
It's just, but of course, most people who are interested in rough and tumble play as kids don't usually grow up to become early childhood educators, right? That's a piece of it, I think, is people who are into rough and tumble tend to like that, who really like it, tend to want that adrenaline rush. And
Which
so
you
they
don't
get it from
in a
other
typical
jobs.
early childhood. Yeah. I think that Francis
Right.
Wardle maybe talks about that a little bit in his Oh Boy book.
Yeah.
And I know I've heard you talk about it too, Mike, but I was like, what does that remind me of? But yeah.
People will even create rules that don't exist. They say licensing won't let me. And I'm thinking,
Yes.
I've reviewed most states' licensing requirements. And I see nothing that says, now it does say make it safe so that children are capable of doing big movement, which is natural. But to say that they won't allow rough and tumble play, I don't know where that exists.
Yeah, I mean, there might be.
Actually, I do know at least one state, Georgia, in their licensing, which, so Frances Carlson, who we were talking about, that's where she teaches. So whenever she teaches in her own state, she has to say, I'm going to tell you what research shows is good for children. But I also have to tell you that licensing tells you you're not allowed to allow kids to play fight, I think is what it says. So she has to give that.
I think Indiana might too. Now that you say that, I think Indiana, at least when I was a center director, said play fighting was something you shouldn't have and do.
And so for me, it's like, don't call play fighting then, call it roughhousing. I don't allow play fighting. I allow roughhousing.
Right.
That's the difference.
We can play that game all day long.
Yeah.
I call it big movement. No, I don't think so.
Right.
It's fighting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Called conservation of momentum studies.
We are really good at euphemisms in early childhood, so let's just take advantage of that and use it for our own purposes. I like this. So the very last paragraph of the article, he starts by saying, these days it's risky being an early childhood educator.
Yes.
And then he goes on to say, when we allow ourselves to remain unsettled and carry a willingness to be disturbed, we open a floodgate of possibilities. And I think that's what we've been talking about, is people are worried about the way it makes them feel when they hear that this is okay, or when they watch it happen. Like my colleague at the preschool is really open to it. She'd never thought about rough and tumble play or roughhousing being a developmental good, because she's an SLP and not an early childhood person. But she's open to it, but she really struggles because she feels uncomfortable watching it. So I know that there are folks that it will be hard for, but that's where learning happens, right? When we're uncomfortable and we're taking risks, and that's where we grow.
And I think, Heather, you and I talked about this a little bit the last session, is the fact that for not permitting rough and tumble play might give me less control as an adult. So that need still to be, quote, in control is viewed as out of control if we allow rough and tumble play.
Right.
And how does that reflect on me as a teacher? I think is part of the reason why rough and tumble play is often in question. And I think that last paragraph that he writes provides that opportunity to recognize that, yes, there is perhaps some concern, but it's not the major development that decides whether or not rough and tumble play is important. Yeah.
Yep. I might be running out of words. I'm at the point where I'm just listening and agreeing now. So unless you both, either of you have something you were dying to get in, maybe this is a time to.
I was thinking of just reading, I'd found a speech I had done like 4 years ago recently And I think it's funny because now I'm reading it now. It's like, oh, this is even better. But I'll just read this rather than trying to remember.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we are creating a culture of consent in our classrooms so that children of all genders learn what it means to have ownership over their bodies. We need to reject the old notion of boys will be boys, while also refraining from pathologizing the desire for some children to play rough. Rather than banning certain play, we need children to learn to make sure they only play with others who want to play the same way. That is consent. That is what every child needs to learn.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Also, I love
That
the
is
word
really-
pathologizing. It's one of my new favorites.
Yes.
Yeah, we can pathologize a lot.
We're really good at it.
Yeah.
Did you have something you were going to say, Dan? I jumped in.
No, I think that that's a crucial statement, Mike, that you made, and I think we would agree that it's important no matter what gender.
Yes.
And it's just an essential part of natural experiences, and being able to decide for yourself as a child who is involved in your play. It's a voluntary component. It creates self-confidence. It allows children to be natural in their experiences. Is part of what really needs to happen, and really needs to be allowed to create those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This has been such a great conversation. I have a lot to think about after listening to this one. So I appreciate both of you sharing so much and bringing so much to it, and joining me on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you both for being here, and thanks everybody for listening. And I hope you'll come back for our next episode. Goodbye.